Hi, my name is Eve Bolton, and I'm pleased to be the chair of the board's, if you will, Finance Committee, but also known as our Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. We are meeting today. We meet monthly, and we're very happy that you all are here. I'm going to have our wonderful Rob, as he introduces some tech, say the magic words about how you might be able to participate. And then we'll go around the table so that you know who is seated here and ready to do business. Rob, if you would.
Good morning. If you'd like to participate in the board meeting at the end during the hearing of the public, please click the hand icon during the meeting, and we will ask you your name and school association, and we will invite you in at the end of the meeting to speak during the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Cody.
Good morning. My name is Cody Hutchins, contract analyst.
Good morning. Name is Joseph Porter, Accounting Operations Manager.
Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Board member.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Good morning, I'm David Foote. I'm on the audit committee.
Good morning, Lauren Roberts, Chief Audit Executive.
Good morning, Emma Williams, Internal Audit Supervisor.
Good morning, Fanny Carradine, CFOP President.
And we have Mike Guston, Assistant Treasurer's online because he's home ill.
Good morning. Good morning, Mike. And we will be having our superintendent join us in many minutes. She's on school visits and is on her way here. And we've had our illustrious president also show up. So appreciate it. I know she just sat through the policy meeting with us. So if you, Emily, if you'll introduce yourself, I think that'll take care of it.
Emily Bell with Ask Me, Local 232.
Thank you. All right, we have a full agenda as always, and are in the midst of, I would hope, rounding third regarding budget efforts and decisions. So we'll turn it over to the treasurer, who will be introducing the initial parts of the agenda, if that's okay with you, Madam Treasurer.
Certainly. So the first item on the agenda is the monthly financials, and I'm introduced to you Kevin Ashley, who traditionally reports out for us.
So it's me again. So just go through these pretty quickly, but if you have any questions, certainly let me know. These are for July. I'm just going to go straight to the slides and then we'll talk a little bit about each one. So the cash balance slide. So you'll notice the cash balance at the end of July is down a little bit. Some of the key things I just wanted to talk about there is, the higher level of expenditure as we finish out the fiscal year is actually, leading to our lower cash as well. Month-end encumbrances are a little bit down. Part of that may relate to temporary appropriations and things not being put in just yet, but really pretty consistent from last year as well. Next slide is the revenues. You'll notice that revenues are up a little bit. We put in our preliminary number, that the latest, kind of taking the forecast and trying to add in the additional state funding, what we anticipate the revenue to be. Because we got the large property tax advance already, we received a big chunk of that. So on the next slide, you can actually see, although it's kind of small, but 152 million is the property tax advance monies that we've already received, which is about half of our allocation that we'll get for property taxes. We'll get the other bulk probably in January. Green is the state foundation, and you can see what our preliminary estimate is in the budget column. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we go over that budget seminar that Mike and I went to. So we'll go into that a little more detail. But there'll be a true up related to state foundation when we get to around October, because they haven't fully implemented everything. Next slide is expenditures. Of course, we have the 300 million temporary appropriations, and we're carrying over approximately 16 million in encumbrances from the last year. You'll notice it's kind of hard to see, but the actual expenditures in this July were 35.9 million. Last year was 24.9. The main reason, so there's kind of a glaring reason here, and I tried to call it out here, is last July, we were still in the process of closing out the school-wide pool. So teachers that are on stretch pay were paid in July in Fund 598. And we didn't do it. Traditionally, when school-wide pool was active, we did transfers to cover it every month. But what happened is later in the year, we adjusted all those expenses to general fund. But as of the end of July, those expenses were sitting in Fund 598. That makes sense. So you can't compare apples to apples, because actually, if you take that out of this year, our expenditures are pretty flat, actually maybe down just a little bit. There's a lot of timing issues when we get into from month to month, you know, when there were some other things, and I noted here, the athletic contracts, like one year was paid in July, the next year was paid in August. I think this year was paid in July, last year was paid in August. So that's a timing difference. And then transportation, we had larger transportation expenses in July of last year and not so much this year.
Is there, if I might, is there a reason for the larger amount of transportation last July than this July?
I think it was a timing catch up last year. And
Treasure.
and our hope is this year those have been paid more timely or
Madam
resolved
Treasurer.
more timely.
So this year in June, we paid the then and nows, where the former year we didn't pay them out until July.
So it's a matter of where it
It's
shows
just the
up on the
timing.
books?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So that difference of $10 million is everything that you just explained?
Yes. Yes. So last year, general funds expenditures were 24 million. This year they were 35. However, this year, all of our teachers that are on stretch pay are paid out of the general fund. Last year, as we were closing out school-wide pool, about 14 million of salary and other things hit the school-wide pool fund, because we're only talking about general fund here.
But we didn't do the transfer from general fund to 598 until later in the year. We wanted to make sure that we only did it one time in the year to close it out. So we just waited, where previous years we would do the transfer every single month.
It just makes it a little harder, the apples to apples. I have to dig, because, you know, first when we were looking at it, it's like, well, our expenditures are up. You know, that's the first takeaway when you look at the slide. But then when we dug into it, there's those other factors that account for that.
Thank you.
The next slide is just preschool expansion. Obviously, we haven't finalized the budget on this, but we're showing what the actual, so property tax advances that are allocated to that fund were 7.1 million. Last year was 6.2. Some of that, again, is going to be timing, because we might have got them a little bit earlier this year than last. And then just some other general expenditures, mainly related to administration and stretch pay there. And that's all for that section.
Any questions about preschool? Because I have a couple. Great.
But preschool is really, it shows an increase, and we have them give us a presentation as to why that increase is there, which I don't have a problem with at all. But that's really money that's carried over that we already had, that they didn't use years previously. Correct. So that's not really anything.
In this particular slide, it actually is July receipts.
Go back to that percent slide. Well,
The amount shown here is actually July receipts that we got from the county auditor. We're not showing the balance. I think last month we had a slide showing the carryover balance and how we're eating into that. I think preschool is going to do a presentation maybe next month. So we kind of were deferring to that at this point.
so what we're seeing here, explain that one more time.
So it's kind of routinely, this is the Hamilton County property tax advance
Okay.
on the August settlement. So as we get those advances, we break it down and say, okay, how much is going to be related to this levy. But again, I do caution it's a timing thing. It's not that it's really going to be $1 million more. It's probably going to end up being pretty flat.
Just a couple
Vice President?
questions. So, and I know we still are kind of working through the partnership agreement with the master agreement, right? I think we're still in the midst of that.
So the last I heard was they presented us with some revisions, proposed master agreement changes. We reacted to it, and so much time had gone by, they wanted to change some of their recommendations, but I haven't seen what those are yet. So I'm not sure from their perspective where that stands, but we do not have a new agreement.
Okay. And then kind of following up on that, and again, I think we've not had a new agreement for a little while, so we've been operating kind of under this MOU.
The former agreement, yeah.
Yeah, under the standards of the former agreement. Is there a time frame when we would start to expect those costs to start coming in?
Yeah, so the budget that they recommended for fiscal year 24 was over $11 million, which is far exceeds half of the 15 million that we share. So that you're right. So we are chewing into the actual carryover from previous years. But there's 3 items in that budget request that are outside that old agreement that cost about $1.5 million. So my recommendation is not to fund the new items until we come to a new master agreement. So we're still operating under the old agreement. So I would reduce their budget request by $1.5 million for those new items.
Okay. And I know when they did their presentation, I think some parts, they moved some things around because, one, like they weren't able to fill positions or stuff like that they weren't able to do. And so they're kind of rethinking some of that. Other aspects of it was to kind of expand who was eligible or expand some of the resources that we did for some of the different programs. For our side of the preschool promise stuff, though, we should start to, like in the next few months, we'll start seeing some of those costs come in as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right. So there's not a lot of expense because preschool hasn't started yet.
Yeah.
But so in August, you'll see about probably half a month's worth of tuition assistance on both organizations.
And then my final question is really, and I think that's also where we'll start to know where the numbers are for the number of students that are we're actually funding through the preschool promise.
So the challenge with preschool is it's a rolling enrollment. It's not you're not mandatory attendance, so you can roll in February if you want. Typically, if I remember correctly, the peak of enrollment for preschool is around January, February timeframe.
Okay.
And so you'll see that increase all year long. But I don't think they actually start until next week. I think preschool starts next week, so we should see the bulk of it.
Member Morosky
Right.
reminded us of that.
Yes.
Several times as his child is getting ready to go to Porter Hayes.
Earlier in the week, I looked at our enrollment data, and preschool is only down a couple hundred kids at this point, which is better than we normally see at this time of year.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I expect that we'll probably exceed our enrollment projections, at least for us. I don't know about CPP.
And that's one of the things I think is just a thing for us to be thinking about. I know we've talked about a good portion of why our numbers keep going up in cost is because every year we've had more and more students taking advantage of those opportunities. And so if we are potentially going to have an even greater year than before, continuing to keep growing, that's something for us to think about as we go to look at what do we need for the next levy for preschool promise.
So next month, we'll bring back that projection of chewing into that carryover balance. We're going to run out faster than we thought if our enrollment continues to grow.
I would just like to second the issue about one of the increases within the preschool promise proposed budget. As you mentioned, that are not necessarily part of the master agreement. And the agreement that we made is not just between us and CPS and preschool promise folks, which, by the way, that's been an incredibly successful experience for everybody. I think it is an agreement we made with the public who voted and then renewed that levy. So I feel very
I'm sorry. The committee is on the cost of quality. They were recalculating what the cost of quality is. Remember, one of their recommendations was to increase the value by 10%, which the master agreement allows for a 3% growth for each year. So they wanted to go to 10%, but there was a committee that was looking at justifying that value. But there was 3 items that were new or outside the agreement that they put in their budget.
So I think that I understood the next step to be they were going to take the board members that had commented, those recommendations back to that committee and then to their board, and then give us an updated, revised report. So I thought that's what we stood.
I think my recollection was that comments that were made by the board would be taken by our administration that's doing the negotiations back to them, which I don't know if that was the second or third phase that happened. I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
They're not going. They didn't take what we said. What we say has to go through the administration. So again, it sounds like the ball is in their court regarding the drafting of the agreement.
It's my understanding the last CPP finance and audit meeting got canceled, so I don't have an update.
Okay. Thank you. Continue.
So, so Mike, are you doing the grants?
Yes. Hopefully you guys can hear me. So I'll be brief with the grants. Rob, if you can pull up the graph for me. Okay, so this is the ESSER grant as of July 31st. You can see we continue to spend along, so we're doing quite well. That is spent and encumbered. So, obviously the goal is to spend every penny by the end of June of next year. So we're working through that. If you could flip to the other one, Rob, the spend percentage. Thank you. So I'm kind of proud of this one. This is a month-over-month spend, and you can see we actually rebounded in July. The dark blue is current year, and you can see we rebounded from where we were. So really proud of all the work the grants team has been doing on that. All the budget owners keeping things moving through. Obviously, I don't know, as we've discussed before, grants is a 15-month cycle. So July, August, and September is really about paying out things that were previously, encumbered. And so we work really hard on getting all the outstanding purchase orders in, getting the invoices paid, so we can do the final expenditure reports. And the other thing I would say about that is we are going to switch up the reports a bit for next month. So we've been doing a single year report. It's okay. We've been doing a single year report every year, but then we flip it, right? So in July we flip to the new year. We never really show you how the previous grant year ended. So you're actually going to we're going to double up the big report that Chair Bolton enjoys so much. So we'll have 2 versions of that. So we're actually going to double it for you. So you're going to get 2 of those. So
excellent.
So two times the reports. Do you guys have any questions?
Questions, members? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Okay, going on to the next document, the long one.
Actually,
or did you already do that?
Oh, excuse me.
can I just ask one?
Vice President?
And I know we restart the cycle with this graph that's on the screen there. Do we get is that one of the things he's talking about, is bring in kind of how we ended closing out everything within that?
Yeah, so what they've typically done is we get our initial allocations, and then sometime in December, January, we get our carryover from the previous year, they lump it in, so the percent spend drops dramatically in the middle of the year. So what we're going to do is separate. So here's your initial allocation, this is how we're spending it out, and then we'll report the carryover separately. So it's much more meaningful that way. Yeah. So, Mike, you still there?
Yeah. That was perfect answer, Jen. Thank you.
It's just a love fest today.
So Rob's showing the big, long sheet now that shows every single grant that we manage, state and federal grant that we manage, and then the spend out of where that is, and then the percent, whether they met the spend goal or not. I don't know if you have any questions. You're used to seeing this document.
Numbers?
Yes, it's a 8x11 document, 8x14, no, a legal size. It's in there somewhere.
If I could ask just on this, where it says not met, what's the result of not met? I mean, what does that mean for us?
It's all stapled together.
It just means that they haven't, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
So every month we have a goal. So if you look at the very top there, there's a spend percent, right? And so every month we have a percent. And so it's just whether they met the spend percent or whether they haven't met the spend percent. And so that tells us, it tells the grants team, you know, and the budget owners which grants we need to focus a little more on. Some of them are timing issues. A couple of the grants are highly dependent on year-end, you know, journal entries or year-end things. But it's definitely just a way to give you an idea of how we're doing. I would also say just a highlight of this year is Fund 467, which is the old student wellness before it became part of general fund. We closed that out except for some encumbrances have to pay out, but that one is closed now. We did that this month.
And just to remind you, that student wellness money got thrown into the formula and is now subject to state share, so it's dramatically smaller than we used to get.
What a surprise. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
We talked about title monies and schools not spending their title funds and the ramifications of that. We talked about that a few months back, and that just appalled me that schools were not spending their title funding, but it came down to, in my mind, awareness and education. So what is in place specifically for like the title money? I'm looking at the big numbers that are still available non-personnel. What is in place to help the schools understand that they need to spend their title money, how to spend it, and maybe a process or procedural timeline to help them spend X number of dollars by first quarter, by second quarter, so that we don't have title money spent?
So great question. We created a budget owner's dashboard so that the budget team will meet with their schools on a regular basis and review all their spending by fund, so that the awareness is there. And Mike and I are creating an executive leadership team dashboard so that at that level, they'll be able to see the spend in an easy way every month. And so as we see anomalies, we'll start challenging those. The difficulties we have to make grants. Go ahead.
I would just add, last year I think was tough because it was the transition from school-wide pull, and there was a lot of education was done, a lot of learning, but I can tell just at the start of this year we're getting better questions from the schools, like they've been through it a year, so they kind of know what's allowable, what's not. But you know, I've got several email threads with principals already at this point in the year looking, you know, what can we do with this? How can we spend this? How do we make sure, you know, this gets done? So
I would suggest or add, and not to belabor this, but this was one of those items, if you will, in the budget process that was, you know, I think had great transparency this year, in part because of the town halls and also because of the pause or whatever on the Title I. But I also recall, though, that part of the issue that we were concerned about, and I think it was Member Moffitt that brought it up, I believe part of the Title I that administration gave to schools kind of a multiple choices as to how they could use Title I, and I think that expedited the use of it. But I also hope that it not necessarily is always our answer as we, you know, try to make sure that our schools are able to spend not as they necessarily see fit, but there are things that are unique in an equitable standpoint. So if you'll talk briefly about that, Madam Treasurer.
So we used to do that. We used to give them a menu of items that they could spend in Title I during the Bill Miles days. It's been a few years. The challenge for last year was because we left the school-wide pool. School-wide pool was so unrestricted because the title monies lose their identity once they enter the pool. So when we went from school-wide pool back to restricted funding, there was a lot of things that principals were used to spending money on in 598 that they could no longer do in Title I because of the restricted spending. And so we last year published a document of allowable uses by fund. So you can do something in the general fund that you can't do in title or whatnot. And so we've been sharing those things in our Finance 101 class that all of our budget owners are going through. We started with the principals last year, and then we're going to circle up with the new principals this year, starting with the first principal meeting next month. So it is about education and staying on top of them and helping them. And so the menu items for this year were specifically tied to the board goals and guardrails. And so we're trying to make sure that we're driving all of our spending efforts to drive student outcomes.
Thank you.
I think one of the other things that we talked about last year, and I think we've talked about a couple times before, even with school-wide pool, we always still had underspend from folks budgeting for things that they ultimately were never able to do. And I know you all have talked about in the this last year or so that's another one of those things where you're going to try to have those more regular conversations with them,
right?
Keep them on track with, okay, so have you done X, Y, and Z that you said you were going to do? Right. So that should help also, right?
Right. They have the same pattern in the general fund. The difference is we don't have to return general fund monies. It just reverts back to cash. Federal funds, they have carryover limits. So if you don't spend enough, then you have to give the money back. And so, yes, we put steps in place with the dashboards and the meetings to try to keep everybody on task. But there's always this desire they're afraid to run out of money. So they wait and wait and wait. And then, but the culture and the teaching that we're trying to do is the monies that we have this year is supposed to be spent on this year's kids. So if you wait until the end of the year to spend it, you're not spending it on this year's kids. And so it's an education, and so yeah, it's working.
You have another question?
I do. Hang on, man. Age is getting. I just have my question.
It only gets worse.
Man, I don't know if that's gonna help. So it was about title, and it was about the autonomy. When you talk about the menu item and schools having to select, I want to make sure that we're allowing the schools to still have autonomy, especially on title funds, of what they can spend their money on, and it not be just, hey, it has to be. I understand when you said it's tied to goals and guardrails, that kind of triggered me to think like, okay, we're still narrowing down, we're drilling down one more time or one more level of what they can do. But I want to ensure that they're still allowed to be able to use those funds for what their community.
So after the priorities, almost all schools had enough money to use to go spend on something else. So they could either use the extra money to spend on another reading specialist or a math specialist, or many schools chose a data coach again, which, you know, I have some philosophical differences with, but that's me. But they do have autonomy. So part of their money is kind of dictated based on their data and their scores and their needs, and the rest of it is based on their choice. You want to say something?
I concur. The only other thing that I would add to that.
By the way, the superintendent has come back from her multiple school visits and she has now joined us.
Yeah, good morning. Second day of school, so it's been great. The only other thing that I would add to that is there's also clarity, and I have one current example right now where there are some things that are approved for schools to do, but they also have to be in alignment with the CBA. So for example, we have one school, Woodward, that would like to use additional funds brought through Hamilton County for an additional days of instructional coaching. That's approved in terms of Title I because it's an additional support. However, as a part of our CBA, our support for teachers comes through district-wide mentors. So that may be one that comes up as a concern because it just raised, and I was looking for Julie because she's generally here, it just raised on Wednesday. So that would be one that if someone comes back and says, hey, we can't do this, this is the reason why, because that support is offered through the district, even though it is an allowable expense through Title I funding.
I would add, I know there's a couple of schools as we did that transition about community folks that were kind of the community liaison folks. I know there were a couple of schools that even with the change that we made in the name of transformation regarding our high schools, that there were still some schools that wanted to maintain their career tech or career person. I'm trying to come up with the right title. I can think
Career
of
tech coordinators. What
There you go, career tech coordinators, because that was so important to, I think, raising their graduation or whatever. So if they still had money for that, was that still an option, or was that one of the ones that was excluded? Because I know we were in the process of repositioning and redefining those positions.
The positions were actually school community coordinators or
Okay.
assistant school community coordinators, and they were not an option. Those positions were delimited.
Okay.
All school community coordinators and assistant school community coordinators, other than the ones that we brought to the board, were delimited.
So in that instance,
Correct.
they could not use, and that's what I think they were
Yes.
told, they could not use their title funds for that,
Yes, ma'am.
for those positions. Thanks. Okay.
So I don't, Mike, did you have anything else on state and federal grants?
No, I did not.
Okay. So next item on the agenda is the budget analysis discussion seminar called the BAD seminar. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. So I think Kevin.
It really is called that. I was in Columbus and people called it bad seminar. Oh, really? Well, many of them are, but this is like for real.
So last night I sent you all the documents that they handed out. I did not kill more trees today. So there you have it electronically, and Kevin's going to give you a very high level summary.
Oh, okay. I was getting nervous. Like, are you going to look at
We're going to read this headline.
Yeah, we're having
Until Tuesday.
called in for dinner. Go ahead. Yeah.
So actually, we did just give you a hard copy of this. Rob has electronically too. So we kind of did a one-page summary to kind of our key takeaways from Mike and I. And then we have about 4 pages that kind of gives a little more detail on some of the topics. So I'll just,
That's not it. That's not it.
oh, that's the actual slides.
So it's what Kevin sent you this morning.
It's the one page.
There you go.
There you go.
No, you're good.
Gosh, Rob.
It only has 85 documents.
Right. Right. So yeah, like I said, the first page is the key takeaways, and then for each of those, we kind of gave a little bit more detail, but I'll try to give you a brief overview. So obviously, there was a lot of talk about the budget and what has come of that. They did maintain most of the Fair School Funding Plan provisions that that public schools had asked for and hoped for. They continued the phase-ins. Actually, I think all the proposals, the governor's proposal, the Senate version, the House version, all included the phase-ins. So we'll go to 50% for 24, 66, 67% for 25, and then we still anticipate in the next biennial. The discussion, it seemed that the will is they will continue to phase it in. However, we've got another budget cycle that will have to be approved for that. They did change the DPIA, the Disadvantaged People Impact Aid or Economic Disadvantage, to phase those in at the same rate. Initially, they weren't, but they are now phasing those in at the same rate. They did update the local capacity information related to property and income taxes. And they also updated base cost inputs from the 2018 values to the 2022 values. So a couple of those were positive outcomes that actually came from the House version. So we were fortunate that that was implemented. If you recall, there was some discussions about changing property assessments, changing these local capacity issues that would have resulted in bringing down the state share. So fortunately, those things did not get included in the final budget. They did update statewide average base cost, which also impacts how much we'll get for categorical funding. And as a side note, actually impacts how much they provide in vouchers. The amount for vouchers, as everything increased, that actually then flows over to increase the voucher amounts as well. I'll talk about vouchers for a minute as well in just a minute. Some other things in the budget related, just some state taxation provisions, as you're probably aware. They did lower the income tax rates to 2 brackets from 4. Another interesting thing, which doesn't directly impact us, but kind of just give you some background on there, is the CAT tax, the commercial activity tax. They're phasing in $6 million exemption, so businesses can exempt up to $6 million, and that will eliminate that tax for 90% of Ohio businesses. They provide a sales tax holiday, which is going to be expanded next year. And one of the things we had talked about previously was the sports gaming tax. The way that was originally set up was to be earmarked for school extracurricular items. However, that money doesn't come back to individual districts. It just goes into the education funding piece at the state level. And so they increase that tax, but it's going to actually just provide more money to the state to cover the costs for education and vouchers and that kind of thing. We do get a very small amount of casino tax revenue, and that's been in place for a while. But as far as the sports gaming, that will not come directly to the school. We'll just go to the state. Yeah.
Find the money somewhere for the vouchers.
So yeah, all those things kind of impact the state's pot of money that's available. So that's why we kind of didn't want to go over those. The next one is expansion of vouchers, as I'm sure you're aware. I talked a little bit about Ed Choice vouchers. What they did was establish a universal eligibility with a few caveats to that. So the voucher amount is prorated above certain income levels. The full voucher amount for families at or below 450% of federal poverty, which is over 70% of Ohio families, are eligible for the full voucher amount. Partial vouchers are provided on a sliding scale for all other income categories, and the minimum is 10%. So regardless of your income, everyone qualifies for at least 10% of the voucher amount. It also expanded the tax credit that can be taken for education expense as well. Income verification, this was one we found a little interesting. Basically, those who participate just have to provide an affidavit that they meet the income requirements. Not a whole lot of enforcement of that from what the discussion.
I heard in one seminar that there's no enforcement of it. Let's just say it.
I was trying to be
I know
politically
you
correct,
were.
but
I'm going to tell you what it is.
right. No, I agree with that. Pretty much was the conversation on that. And some of the other vouchers that expanded eligibility as well. One interesting thing I know that requires annual reporting of tuition rates for private schools that enroll students under any type of a voucher program. So I'm assuming that's a new requirement that we may hear some more details about. As part of where they were trying to include some accountability and those kind of things. Next category is the ODE restructuring and changing some of the duties for the State Board of Education duties. Essentially, most of the duties of ODE will go to this new agency, the Department of Education and Workforce, which currently is due. DEW, they kind of joked about, we don't know if that's where it'll end up, but it seems to be. The governor will appoint a director with advice and consent of the Senate, and that director will be a cabinet level position. It also then establishes the Division of Primary and Secondary Education and Career Tech Education, which will have deputy directors as well. State Board of Education, their duties will now include more of the licensure, professional conduct, teacher evaluation, those type of things. Department of Children and Youth will take on some of the things like child care licensure that was handled by ODE previously, early childhood education through ODE, JFS, preschool special education will also go to this new group, some other categories. Implementation of funding calculations. So as I said, like when the clock rolled over July 1, they didn't automatically give us all this extra money and make the adjustments. They did go ahead and change the phase-in percentages to 50%, and we saw that on our August payments. The next round will happen in October. At that time, they'll add the 22 inputs, update the valuation income data, update current year enrollment, and any other formula changes. But part of the law, too, certain aspects were effective immediately, July 1, and others were a 90-day implementation. So that's one reason we won't see those till October. 5, I won't go through all those, but there is a lot of different literacy programs, learning acceleration, transportation, some student wellness issues that were included there. Some random things: requires all non-licensed school employees to be enrolled in the RAPBAC program, the Retained Applicant Fingerprinting Database program. They mentioned that. You know, obviously they're all required to do fingerprinting background checks, any school employee, but they weren't originally in this reporting system. So I think that's a new item there as well. Another thing it talked about, Governor's Merit Scholarship provides $20 million in FY25 to provide $5,000 scholarships to students in the top 5% of their graduating class. Scholarships must be used at the Ohio Institution of Higher Education, and they can receive it for up to 4 years based on satisfactory academic progress. So I'm sure we'll hear some more about that as we get closer to that, but I think that was an encouraging thing, I think, for students to have available.
Any questions, members, superintendent? I appreciate you bringing this bad thing back to us. I was fortunate to represent the district up again on the steering committee for the lawsuit regarding the Vouchers Hurt Ohio. And it was an interesting presentation, as you've just done. And I think we should next month, or maybe October rather than September, spend some major time about vouchers. I think our public needs to be well informed as to what this really does mean. As a matter of fact, one of the justifications for sending this money to us, if you will, their lawyers that are resisting in the state, resisting the lawsuit that we and other districts have brought to bear, basically made a motion that it was moot, that they could get rid of the lawsuit that we're all bringing, because now that all this wonderful money has been given to public schools, the issue of whether or not public schools are getting enough money is now moot. Well, the court has to rule about it, and we're not real concerned about it, but I've been very impressed with the group that is leading the way on this, and I do think in October we ought to really look at the voucher piece, because it is changing greatly, even what our parochial schools are doing and our private schools are doing. There's increases in tuition, there's decreases in parish support, there is very little or no engagement or enforcement regarding these. It's going to become a real problem from a standpoint of manipulating the monies, but plus the interest in building facilities for charter schools and private schools and parochial schools, and using dollars for that. So I do think we ought to maybe do a deep dive once we've gotten through the budget process and what have you, maybe a really deep dive that can be something that would be of use. So thank you for the reports. And I think, Madam Treasurer, you have, unless there's a question or comment, we have the next 3 are on you, are they not?
Yeah. So the next on the agenda is the financial town hall schedule. So thank you for your feedback at the last committee meeting. I took your feedback and outlined topics by date. And then just I put a spot there for any board members that want to participate. And then once we settle this, we'll start publishing it. So
members' reaction or suggestions, or anything missing, or ordered suggestion change?
So I like your idea about vouchers. I think maybe we could even have some financial town hall about that as well. I I looked at this like, what was the reasoning for talking about facilities in September?
But that came out of finance committee last month.
Well, I just meant with regard to having it as a financial town hall. What was the reasoning for having that one in that time period versus having it be something that the community needs to hear regarding finance?
I think this would be my reasoning for that is as you see at the bottom or so of our finance agenda tonight, it's continuing the discussion that the treasurer brought up at the last board meeting about certificates of participation and COPS, and thinking in terms of budget and thinking of the future, whether we're talking about the renewal for preschool or whether we are starting to be serious about applying for COPS, if indeed, which would impact our current budget efforts, because you have to have a certain number of dollars to pay for COPS, and whether or not we would already be taking care of the COPS situation prior to, not in lieu of, but prior to the idea of what do they call it, permanent improvement levy or something,
or a bond
like
levy,
that.
right?
So I think that's part of the reasoning in September. Plus, so it's about the current budget, and it's about how we start to lay the groundwork. It also gets us into this. I know we've talked several times, and it's on the agenda again today, about, and I think the superintendent has raised this, the need for a fact finding about facilities as we review, our assets and what assets to maintain or get rid of, or because this has been a difficult budget year, but as Vice President Craig keeps mentioning, next year is going to be even worse. So I think that was, whether it's September or October, I think it fits there if that works for you.
I think I put it in September because the ad hoc committee had anticipated finishing some work in August.
Excellent.
So you have your ad hoc committee work, but then you also have the $1 billion facility master plan that needs repairs, right? And so collectively, we can't absorb that in our operating funds. And so I think that's why I threw it in September.
Perfect for
but
September.
I'm ambivalent as to what you all prefer.
I just wanted us to stay true to what the purpose of them initially was, which was to educate the community on financial topics that were relevant to them. And as long as, and I see that we've got guests coming, and I love that idea, but I also want us to maintain the excitement and the authenticity that it was the treasurer that, like, it's about finances and it's about educating the community on what the district, why the district needs money, what are we spending the money on, where is the money going. And so when we look at this timetable, I want us to make sure that when we're talking about facilities and needs, that's going to relate to the public about why we are, what are we looking for, what do we need? Not just to have, like, I'm looking at COO, why are we having a COO? I mean, like, I want it to remain authentic to me.
And yes, that's exactly what the topics are about, because when we have these facility needs, we're going to have to fund them. And so it's kind of a teaser, an introduction that we may be doing another levy sometime in the near future, or a borrowing or something. We need to start educating people on the need.
I would only add real quickly on that when the ad hoc committee, starts to put together its next to last or its final or whatever, I think facilities are going to actually be very much at the heart of whatever is happening with ad hoc.
Yes.
So I think you got to lay the groundwork, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. I would like to ask also, though, that we consider, and maybe we move it to October, I don't know, but that we consider having the fact finding with the board prior to the conversation as well, that if we're looking to do it in September, then we schedule the fact finding with the board prior to that session, so that we're able to talk about the true facility concerns through fact finding, so that the board is really clear on what we see as the concerns moving forward. So that would be my only add for that we would make sure that whenever we do it, whenever it's scheduled, if it's the will of the board for that to be one of the topics. I do think it's important. I don't know if it's one that we move up and move 5-year levies and bonds and forecasts all together with the facilities one, because ultimately it's going to intro asking for more funds and talking about CAP, so that maybe that's the space to add it in, but I would just like to make sure that we are able to have the fact finding with the board prior to whatever that session is going to be.
When we get down there to that agenda, we try to choose some dates for the fact finding. I think that makes sense to have that, you know, in conjunction with or in the beginning of it. I don't know. And maybe moving those other things up too might be good, although I'm not sure before the election it's necessarily what we want to start talking about. And that's my personal self-interest that's being expressed, but really that will come up because it is a whole pack as we move to the, you know, we move to the future.
Well, we don't do the forecast until November, so that can't be moved up. But, you know, we can delay, we can switch stuff around to give us more time and space.
Just if we, I think to the superintendent's point, let's try to make sure that fact finding is happening. Okay. I think the board would appreciate post-budget kind of thinking, because that brings you to the future, is to go on ahead.
I was going to say, I think one thing that is important about us talking about facility needs, I think two things. One is that schools are already talking about it. Yeah. There are already needs that they have that they're not able to meet, that at some point we will have to have a discussion about how do we fix things, how do we repair things. You got life cycles and stuff that at some point has to get done. But I think the second part to that is that we get a lot of folks in the community who just simply ask, why can't you do X with these dollars, right? And so I think having that conversation of how do you do facilities, how do you pay for facilities, how do you communicate out if you want to build a new track, if you want to repair a building, how buildings have been updated or renovated and where those costs came from. Like that idea, because I know at least we had the conversation during our goals and guardrails. Folks are like, how come everybody doesn't get a little dome over their tennis court? And it's like, well, that wasn't paid for by general funds in the same way that like the thought process was everybody should have this if one school gets it. And so being able to discuss those things, I think is really a great idea. I also wanted to just point out, I think the conversation around the donations conversation that happens in May, I think that's a great topic that we don't actually talk about enough.
Right.
Because there are a lot of resources that want to be able to give and don't know how.
Right.
And so, I mean, I don't know if that's something that can be both a town hall and some form of whether it's like a whiteboard or something else, it could be something informative.
Oh, great idea. Thank you. That'll be the next one. I love my animated whiteboards.
But some type of thing that also can be there. So that folks have that information even earlier before that point, because I think that's something that would be really helpful. And I know there's a lot of partnerships and stuff with people who said, man, you guys are doing some great things. I can help with this. How do I do that? And
right. Yep.
Thank you. Yes.
I just want to, I'm not opposed to facilities. I just want us to put it in context of the need for the
finance. Yes.
Yeah. And I think it would be good to, board member, Vice President Craig just reminded me, we are using ESSER funds for 3 buildings. It would be really good to report that back to the community on the updates from, if you're talking about facilities, what we're doing with the ESSER funds to those 3 buildings, maybe the status of those things. That's what I envision the town halls to be, is an update to the community around how we are spending the money. At somewhat of an ask, but it's more about the finances for you. And I'm really gonna kind of be a stickler with this, only because in my cohorts across the nation, we've got districts that are looking at how you do what you do in educating the community and replicating that. And so the way that we're taking finances and not mixing academics with it, but it's about finances and giving it back to the community is how we're spending the money. That's part of our responsibility as board members. So I think the board members should absolutely be involved with that, because we do have a fiscal responsibility for that. But it's about giving that awareness and education, and I want to make sure that it's authentically remains.
So I'm changing the topic to the financial impact of financial needs. So that was the idea behind it. I just didn't click. It wasn't use good word choice. But yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
So I would request that any board members that are interested, if you'll just jot down the dates that you would like to participate, and then that way we can have it all scheduled out.
Jen, that's a meeting you pay. No, I'm just kidding.
Anybody's welcome. So the next topic is the Hamilton County Tax Incentive Review Council, which Joseph Porter goes on, and his staff go on my behalf, because it usually it's usually on the last day of the fiscal year, and I just can't tear myself away. So Joseph is going to give us a high-level review.
Mr. Porter.
I was going to literally walk through the highlights put together.
Okay.
It was a 10-page document consolidated to 1 page of highlights.
Well, we appreciate that.
This is on board docs for people that want, like.
Yes.
Right,
Correct.
so they have that.
Yes.
Okay.
And a big part of the meeting was introduction of the new Hamilton County Auditor, was Bridget Kelly. And some of the highlights, we're going to request an additional meeting with the new Hamilton County. No.
Does it say church?
Yes. That's the full.
That's the full report.
Yes.
Go ahead, that's fine. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't really have one.
Sorry. So we're requesting an additional meeting with the Hamilton County Auditor to improve some of our reporting capabilities from CPS to Hamilton County and vice versa, as well as including the city of Cincinnati. And one of those areas is if there's any possibilities that we can include some automation as far as exchange of data. And another highlight, broad overview of TIF definitions. Literally it just explaining as far as what a TIF is. 35 TIF districts in Cincinnati, 51 million received in statutory service payments and 32 million in expenses. And they also define community reinvestment areas and process explained on a consolidated city level. Also wanted to mention the numbers that were reported are on a fiscal calendar year and not a school calendar fiscal year. We have 363 active CRAs currently, including 22 that were executed in year 2022 calendar year. And we have $2.5 billion in projected investment, 15 CRAs approved by City Council in calendar year 2023 thus far. And then a breakdown, high-level breakdown of the 363 CRAs, 322 annual reports received, and then we have 41 annual reports that have not been submitted to the county and the city, and they're following up on those to try to get those CRA members to submit those reports. TIRC, which is Tax Incentive Review Council, modifications, amendments, and terminations. And I literally took a screenshot from the 10-page document and posted it below with the figures in there. And I'm also, again, going to provide the 10-page document because I don't want to have to walk through that.
Right.
10 pages. So I'll email that to every attendee
have
here.
it.
Oh, okay. So never mind.
But thank you.
So in summary, they go through those meetings, they look at to make sure everybody's compliant with their agreements, and there's 5 that are non-compliant or in default, and you're going to terminate them. So they'll have to pay their regular property taxes.
Do we have those 5? They impact us? Do we know who they are? Or?
You know who they are. Right?
Correct. And they're included in the 10-page
report.
document as well.
Terminations. Other terminations.
The Fortis Group, 1737 Vine LLC, eBarg LLC, Children United LLC, also looks parentheses, Youthland Academy, and Supreme Bright Cincinnati LLC.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's under terminations.
Correct.
Okay, so next on the agenda is the investment update, and Mr. Ashley's back up. Real quickly.
Yes, so these are on board docs as well. Basically just did an interest revenue analysis for the general fund and debt service fund over the last 5 years. We did have a dip in 22, but that's rebounded pretty much in 23. And just for illustrative purposes at the bottom, kind of showing what the 5-year treasury bond rate yield has done. and that gray area was considered a recessionary period. So just to kind of give you that relationship. But you can see over last year, our general fund revenue was only 700,000. Related interest this year was 1.8. So I'd like to get back to those 4 million. A couple years we had 4 million. But
We'll get to it, Kevin. We need it.
And then the next page just has a summary bank reconciliation. For all of our accounts, the main thing I want to emphasize, it's all funds. So the amount that's available for general operating is much less, but this shows all of our funds and be it what type of investment and the percentage. You know, our Red Tree managed investment account makes up 56% of our balance at June 30. And that fluctuates throughout the year. The amount they manage doesn't, but our other balances will fluctuate.
Why don't you go ahead and talk about the things that are being added to the treasury report? One is the investment report. That's a compliance issue.
Yeah. So they're separate documents. I'm not sure if Rob has those, but two things that will be added to the treasury report at the next board meeting is we have an annual investment reporting requirement. Any public entity that invests in commercial paper or bankers' acceptances, those have to be reported to the state. There's a process for reporting that, but we have to run those to the treasurer's report. Red Tree manages all of that for us, and they provide the reports. It's just a matter of certifying it up. The other thing that will be added is the ability to repay the advances to the general fund that were made at the end of June. And so we'll be doing those in August. And then the annual transfers for bond retirement from the general fund, as well as the classroom facilities maintenance. So you'll see those on the treasurer's report, but we wanted to, since we had them available, go over those real quick.
Thank you. Then Jen, you'll make mention of that at the next board meeting as to those changes that are on the treasurer's report, or what? How is that?
So these are annual things that we do. It's just, so at the end of every year, the general fund has to advance money to any state or federal grant that's in a deficit, and it's in a deficit because we pay the money and then we ask for the state to reimburse us on those grants, and it doesn't always happen. I mean, typically it takes a while for the money to come back to us. So no grant is allowed to be in a deficit situation. So we temporarily move cash to cover that, and then this moves the money back to the general fund where it belongs. And then the transfers were required to transfer money from the general fund into the debt service fund so that we can make our debt payments. And then also, as the facility master plan, we're required to put $3 million plus every year into that facility fund in order to do the day-to-day operational repairs like filters and stuff like that. But it's not about repairing roofs or, you know. Right. So it's just like the day-to-day maintenance of the buildings. And so that's just an annual thing that we do. And then the investment requirement is once a year as well. So yes, I'll mention it at the board meeting.
That would be good.
To explain it. Okay, questions about investments?
Or Turk, or anything else, financial town, anything that treasurers brought forward? I would like to just make a comment. It's possible that the audit committee might want to begin to think, I know it's not on the work plan necessarily. We don't mean to make more work, but I think it, well, but we're going to. It might not be a bad topic somewhere in the year for the audit committee to get a kind of fuller review of what the voucher thing really is about. I think I know our audit committee is always very worried about those monies going through and out and not coming this way. So just be thinking about that as to what all might be involved there, if that pleases the audit committee and our chief. Anybody else? All right. Next item then, we're going to be on our transportation review, and this is a very narrow one. Not asking for a big report, but we do have to take some action, I think, in the next board meeting regarding the bus stops and whatever is we know required by law. Superintendent, is this yours?
Yes, it is. Thank you. And thank you for the feedback on yesterday. While not perfect in terms of transportation, just an amazing improvement. And so we feel good about that right now. And even it seems to be even better today. So in terms of our inspections, we really started our inspections with our staff before we transferred the routes to our contractors. We got the routes to our contractors 2 weeks before school started, 2 weeks before our school started, and a week before our earliest non-pub or charter school started. So they received them in enough time to run the routes, to make sure that the routes were safe. At this point, we've not heard a lot of feedback yet from families with concerns around routes. And so we do believe that on the 28th, that for our next board meeting, we would be bringing to the board a request for the resolution to make sure to certify the safety for our routes, and doing that early in the year versus when it's been done in the past.
Great.
Proximity of, were there questions about that part?
Any part about bus stops? And this, for whoever's watching, this is about Yellow Bus. It's not that we get to change the metro stops, although I know in years previously, we've talked, and we left it, we've talked in terms of the proximity to the high schools where these kids would, you know, on the regular routes, how close do these buses come to the high schools? I know we even did, you know, measurements by, you know, feet and yards and whatever a couple of years. And I know there's still that discussion, two things about whether or not any kind of opportunity for access to any of the campuses to try to increase the safety. And I know that's still being discussed, but it doesn't seem to be picking up a lot of steam. But then the other piece besides that, and this is something I keep mentioning, and that is a kind of a review, if we could, two things. When our high schools are close to business districts, and there are a number of them that are. And I think that if there's a way for Metro and our administration to kind of look at that, especially, if you will, at the, like the part that you did about discipline on your presentation about what the 4 times we're going to concentrate on discipline is arrival, departure, cafeteria, and halls. Arrival and departure, these do present challenges to the neighborhoods where our high schools are, not to mention to traffic pattern and whatever. And the only big complaint I heard yesterday, or worry, it's not a complaint, it's not fair to characterize it. It still is about the density of traffic and what have you, especially around West High and Dater on that street and around. So I mean, I'm sure there's others. I know it's an issue for Hughes invariably, but I think if we could just find, I don't know that there's anything to be done about it, but it is a problem for our kids and for the neighborhood and for the businesses that are in the business district. So I don't know, questions about Metro or about Yellow Bus, Dr. Moffitt?
I think the superintendent and I had a conversation last year before we realized that it was complete different type of train wreck last year, but we talked about exploring the fact that some of our schools are in business districts, and our kids are, just from the sheer numbers, are being slightly discriminated against at some of these businesses, because it's not just 1 or 2 students coming in, it might be 25 students coming in at one time. So Withrow, I know personally, is Hughes, and one of our wonderful principals, Bob Cease, shared with me that he was the former principal at Hughes and would go out on Calhoun as an administrator because he knew the students and he would help control that. And so he said, Kareem, is there a policy saying that can't happen? Of course, there isn't one. But
be careful, we'll write one.
We may write one. But the point is that we need to, it's not necessarily as much as it is the administration needs to empower and give some teeth to the administrators to be able to help navigate that traffic around the communities. When I've gone to some of the community council meetings, the communities, Clifton, I know, is definitely willing to support, but it needs to be a partnership between the school and the community and the neighborhood. And I don't know if we are looking at it in that manner. And so I think we need to look at that from a Metro standpoint, from a safety and security standpoint. We need to figure that out. And I think now having those conversations, and we've had some of those conversations previously, but again, it was a different type of issue last year with transportation. We didn't even get a chance to go to the safety and security around the buildings. But when we released 700 kids at one time, 300 kids at one time. Inevitably, that's not the kids doing anything, but just standing there. They are causing traffic jams by their presence because they're waiting on buses. Again, Government Square, when we talked to Metro, I have concerns about just that number of students descending upon Government Square. What is the plan for that? And I think disciplining them is one way, but we're mixing kids from not just CPS schools, various neighborhoods, various schools in our community, and we need to work. And I even put this on one of our joint CPS city meetings to talk about this, because this is an issue that we need to talk about collectively. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and we hope we will be able to talk.
And isn't it wonderful that we're at this point in time that that's what we're worrying about? You know, I mean, after almost 5 years, but it is a concern, and it does need to be done because it is rough for our kids. It's rough. I will say that I know Bob sees, but my experience on how an administrator can impact, and I'm not suggesting they have to go out on the streets or whatever, although I will tell you, not having Sam Yates at Aiken on Belmont was a big difference. I'm glad he's at Woodward to help his wonderful school, but I'll tell you, that was a big difference. Or one person could be the game changer, or having Grace Episcopal Church helping our kids waiting at Hamilton and Belmont and opening their church doors. All that stuff that we did in the emergency of both COVID and also Metro dropping our extra routes. One would hope that we could keep up some of those practices and some of those partnerships or whatever that came to be. But the business districts are very, very crucial right now.
And they're coming. Yeah. I mean, they're coming and talking to us.
Yeah, they are.
So we need to.
Vice President?
I just want to add a couple thoughts real quick. And I think first off, a lot of the feedback that I did hear from folks yesterday was tremendously more positive than it has been in the last couple of years, which I think is a testament to us putting a plan together early, getting stuff done early, and actually having, gone out, checked out the routes, that type of thing. I think, unfortunately, we are an urban district. And so we live in a space where folks are going to go to school in neighborhoods. And, I spend a lot of time in Clifton since I work in Clifton. I can say right now, the problem is in part, yes, students going to and from the bus. But honestly, some of the problem is students leaving in the middle of the day too.
Absolutely.
Students leaving, not getting on the bus and walking up and down the streets. And so I do think there is a conversation that can be had to encourage our school principals and leadership at the schools to reach out to some of the partners within their area. I know especially there's conversations around Woodward that's been a long part of what they've been talking about and been trying to do. But I look at other schools like, for instance, Schroeder is a great example where timing of the start time and end time has been a conversation with the local businesses around it, because even when you had buses going onto going right onto the property, it still caused problems at times for both parents picking up kids and then the traffic from folks leaving and going to and from work. So even when it's not in like a high density urban area, it still has certain implications. But I think it's a tremendous positive this year to not have 800 messages of problems that were happening.
Well, we know the superintendent has.
I know she's getting them.
She's keeping those from us.
Not at all.
She may be getting them, but we didn't.
There was no way I could.
Yes. But I also think, and I think this is maybe another example of how we move forward and how positive we move forward, is there were people at various different schools throughout our district yesterday, kind of reporting and doing that kind of stuff, and it didn't feel like there was this problem that was created as a result of that, right? Like, you didn't necessarily have to have police escort to get the news out there at this school and still get kids into the school. And that's something I think we have to keep growing from, right? That's where we keep embracing the positives. Last thought here is just with regards to Metro, and I appreciated them coming to the board meeting. I thought they provided a lot of great thoughts and information, and I do hope that we can explore and get maybe some feedback from students about some of the locations where they are catching the bus to also give them an opportunity to give us some information, because I know that there are some spaces that it's not about getting them to school. Sometimes it's about where they're getting the bus at to start. You know, for kids who are getting the bus over in area, like if you live in Amberley Village and you're catching a bus, or you live in some hill areas,
There's 3 areas particularly.
you go a long way to get to your bus stop, and if there are problems or if there's alterations to what the route does, that type of stuff, it affects those kids so much more in some ways. So I think it's just good to get some of that feedback once they've been on the bus, once they've ridden for a little while, once they know which bus they're supposed to get on. I had a couple of friends who kids, they all got on, you know, they were heading for the wrong bus, and parents had to be like, well, wait, no, not yours. It's trying to go with siblings. So I think it's good feedback once they've been on there for a little bit.
So you want me to
Please.
respond to any? Okay, so just a few things. Thank you. Thank each of you for the feedback. It brings just a few things to mind. I think one, the ask is to make sure that we're getting some additional feedback from Metro about the proximity and the stops for the students. During the town hall, we did share with the students that and families, anybody that watched, that if there were concerns about any of the stops, they could do direct report to Metro as well, but sharing that with us also so that we can get some feedback and share where the stops are, and also getting the voice from the students. So definitely, I think I heard Board Member Moffitt say after Labor Day, but that's also a way that we can look at how we can get some surveys from the students just about their experience, so that we can share that just around the stops. I think 2 things in terms of encouragement and as we're talking about trying to streamline our overall expectations around behavior for students. While we're focused on behavior in the classrooms, we really want to make sure that all schools have students. And I think one of those that goes along with high schools in terms of transportation is the amount of time that high school students have from when they get out of school to the length of time that their pass is still available for them to get onto the bus. And so we talked about some different things around that when we met with Metro. Our high schools, I think our last time for high schools now is about 3:45. And if they're there after school for tutoring, or if they're there after school because they're meeting with the teacher, by 5 o'clock, they should be able to be on a bus. If you think about it, by about 5 or you know, at least by 5 o'clock. So we've talked about the possibility of doing an additional activity pass at the school level, so that students that are staying after school because they are with the teacher or they're meeting with the club or they're doing whatever, they are still able to get on the bus, not with the extracurricular pass that we're paying for, but with their regular pass. Where we see, and I'll use Hughes as an example, where we see some of the challenge is not because it's not the students just being dismissed. It's because when they are dismissed, they don't get on the bus and go home. Instead, they go into the business district. Yeah, they go into the business district, and we did some deeper work in terms of, which is really why we're trying to work with our students around expectations, around making sure, you know, that we're coming together to CPS Pride, that we're looking at team and using that as a commonality, because in doing deeper work for Hughes, and I think we shared it in this space previously, because so many of the businesses in the business district, and the principal actually did a really good job of working with businesses in the area, but because there was such a challenge with some of the students, they stopped going in the businesses and started going in the parking garages and having some challenges in the parking garage. And you may have heard some of this, especially being in Clifton. So I think that it's something for us to look at as we also work with encouraging our students, sharing with our families, if there's not an after school activity, this is when you should expect them to get on the bus. If they're not staying for an after-school activity. And it's same with Governor's Square, our student, that's the major thoroughfare for them. I think Metro shared that in December that will change. So there will be some direct routes as our students are going from east to west, but those will be options for them. So we want to make sure that they know that that would be the expectation and not just the transfer option, because if they choose, they can still go through downtown and hang in that space until it's time for them to use their pass. So I think it may be something to really consider even around passes. I think right now the passes are open until 6:30. I believe it's 6:30. It may be a conversation around it even an hour earlier, because that might get some of the space, might get more students on the bus earlier versus the students not being in an approved activity at school and then hanging out until that time. So all of the other things are well received as well, but I do think that that's one for us to to call up and discuss also.
Excellent, thank you.
I just caution, only thing that comes to me when I hear about us restricting the time is they're students. They should be able to kind of hang out and be students. I get it, but I think it's about awareness and education and expectation level setting. And that comes from the leader in your building to me. So I just would say, let's get the students' voice. I do know some students who didn't come to school yesterday or today, and I was like, why not? They said they wanted to start on a Monday, which makes no sense to me.
Oh, that's teenager.
That's why I suggested Labor Day.
36 years with them.
There are
That's a
some
teenager
kids
thing.
who are not in school until after Labor Day. So let's get the full complement as best as we can. But then also, I just want us to be able to allow them to be students. And part of that is hanging out. Part of that is, because we do have a large group of students who are not a problem, who are actually hanging out. So and then, you know, the connecting buses is an issue. So we can restrict this, but then if their buses are not connecting on time, I just want us to look at all options.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And for clarity, I think everyone knows how much I support students being students and students doing what it is that we want them to do and enjoying their high school experience. If they are at high school and they are hanging out and they are with an adult, that adult gives them a pass. Those aren't the students that we're seeing that are having challenges. I also agree with you that 80%, I mean, you all heard me talk about 80-10-5. 80% of the kids are doing what we ask them to do just because we're adults and they're not. And so sometimes with most things, we focus more on the 5% than we do on the 80 that are doing what we ask them to do. But at the same time, if they are just hanging out and they are not supervised, that does cause greater challenges, especially if they're on and near our campuses. And so we want to make sure that we're getting that word out there around expectations so that if they are there, they are under the protective eye of adults that are on campus so that other things are also not taking place.
I would just add to that, there's also the interest on the part of the staff and the leadership in every building that when school is over, there is always an effort to say, please leave. Please go away. Please go on the bus. I mean, it is. We're done. And then there's the kids that linger because they've got stuff to do or because they're helping or whatever. But you know what? We would hope that they're not in an environment where they're pushed out of the building. But indeed, if they're not pushed out of the building, people have to be willing to supply the supervision. So you have to be able to, you can't insist that everybody provides supervision. People have to start cleaning. People have to start organizing. Teachers have to do this, whatever. So I don't know where that balance or that tension is, but let's face it, part of the risk and courage for the folks inside the building are saying, hey, I can't be responsible for you, because kids will go around and they'll ask, can I stay in your room? Can I be with you? And it's like, I want to go home, or so we have to figure out how to do that. I don't know if there's that extra golden hour in some buildings. I don't care what we have to figure out something, because we can't make those kinds of demands on staff, regardless of the role that they play. But yet you also don't want them to ever think that get out of here. But I've said it more than once myself.
And I do agree with Vice President Craig that in terms of thinking about leadership, our leadership, does work to do oversight with students and share those things with students. The reason we don't tell them to get out is because we like having them there. Right. But to your point, that there's the space between when long enough is long enough and what is going to happen when there's not supervision. And I think if we begin to collectively have those discussions around expectations, if you are at school after school, there is an adult that you are with. And until after that time, you're expected to get on the bus or drive home or whatever it is that you're doing during that time. So I do think that there is a way for us to continue to have that conversation. We do have a sphere of influence in terms of where our proximity is, which has not stopped most of us from going out in the street and across the street and going where our children are. And I think that they know that as well. So I'll definitely do the follow-up here. But I think the ask for feedback from students was around the safety of their bus stop. I think that that's what the request was, for the proximity.
Sure.
And how safe they are looking at for the bus stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you have an opportunity, all kinds of questions. Is your bus stop, is it safe? For sure, but do you feel safe on the bus? I would say like 5 questions for us, for sure.
And again, the 3 transportation policies that were crafted a couple of years ago give good direction, I think, and those things that we want to be watching very carefully. Anything else on that? Okay, outstanding obligations financially. We've lived through that for a few years, where indeed we didn't get to start a year financially fresh with transportation. How are we starting this year?
So
we know, or who knows?
So there's about $1.4 million in outstanding invoices that were incurred last year. 900,000 of it is related to summer scholars. And so we're working through those invoices to get them paid out. And I'm told $500,000 of invoices were services at the schools incurred. And we need to dig into that one further. So they're researching those values, but much better than in previous years.
Well, yeah, it's better than 30 million dollars. But is that 1.4 plus 900 plus 500,000?
No,
Or that's the total.
1.4 is right.
Breakdown.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Just quick
Sure.
question on that too, and I think this is something that I know we were talking about this last year, towards the end of the year, but just are we also making sure that we putting together, as part of those discussions about how they spend their funds and that type of deal, y'all need to get us this information quicker.
Yes.
Because I do know that's part of the problem for a lot of the expenses that we kind of carry over, is that expense happened in March. No one put the PO through until June, or wasn't completed, or didn't have the right information, or all those type of things. And so just trying to make sure they're understanding how to do that process so they're more efficient with it.
So there's been a lot of education this year in terms of temporary appropriations and people doing partial POs and then forgetting to revise them as time went on. That was part of the issue. Also, they had a vacant accountant position in their department that contributed to a lot of confusion. And so hopefully they'll get to fill that.
I think you were referencing schools as well, though.
Yes.
For POs. And so I think the other piece of that is we really started doubling down on the training last year. There are some that we see that have some repeat concerns with some of this historically and working with our treasurer. So we've done some additional strategies with them as well. And the main thing that we are communicating, and I'm saying it here also because it's really important, because it does come back to when individuals get paid, how they get paid, how long it takes them to get paid, is work does not start until there is a PO. And so if individuals start to work, or if they're allowed to work before there is a PO, that's a problem to start with that we have to follow up with, because ultimately, if that happens and it was done out of any of our granted funds, we can no longer use granted funds to do that. And so it's really helping our teams, all of our teams, and especially our school-based teams, understand that we have to have a PO before we can do work, because after the fact, it makes it really problematic. I mean, we have a few of those right now from schools from last year that we are still dealing with outside of just talking about transportation. And so, we kind of wait and kind of hold on until the end of September to hope that we don't get any others. So it's been much better. I do feel much better about where we were this year with summer scholars, especially in terms of that kind of practice, just because of the systems that we put in place for that, because we know that previously that hadn't been the case. So we feel good about that.
As it pertains to transportation, the last couple of items in it, they aren't listed, and I'm sorry that they aren't, but that would be my fault. The question about the dedicated buses, and I don't know if there's a report about the dedicated buses as to whether or not we have dedicated buses for athletics and other field trips. The other part of, besides the dedicated buses, would, as we start to get our vans or whatever, have those folks within the district that provide for health checks, vision checks, and dental checks, have they been communicated with and saying we now have these means of transportation so that you're not going to be operating under the very limited time frame in the school day, or that there's more options? Because now is when they start scheduling the vision tests, dental checks, and health checks, as well as this is where people are beginning to arrive or arrange for the field trips. I mean, if there's some way of some kind of communication to those folks that do that, that would be very helpful, both at dedicated bus plus some vans, so that we have a full year of service instead of we've had such a minimal service of things that we do so well because of our transportation woes.
So two things. I'll start with the latter first. I will verify that the communication has gone for the health checks, the dental, and the vision. I think I shared previously that we did hire a dedicated person in transportation to organize all of that. And Pope Joy, I think you all know who Wendy is. So she's the person that's organizing that part of it with the usage of the additional vans, field trips, and all of that. I did respond back to the email that I got earlier today about the dedicated buses so that we can help people clearly understand what's happening with that. We have the 10 dedicated buses, the buses that we requested to start with. We requested 326 buses. We needed 316 for routes. So the additional 10 were for athletics. I think the misconception is because we have those 10 buses, that schools like Walnut and Clark will no longer need to provide any of their own transportation. And so for the last 10 years, as I understand, because of the number of activities and sports that those schools are involved in, there is not enough transportation services to cover all of the activities and all of the sports that they have. So they work to prioritize within that. And so that would be the expectation for this year as well. Outside of those 10 buses, we also have the 4 Collins buses that we purchased last year. We got one for every high school. We should have, I think it's another 6. I reported this earlier, but the other group by the end of December. That's what we've been told at this point. And then the others will be by the end of the year. So those things are, but 4 of them are already here and on campuses. So what I did share in the email, and nobody has read it yet because we were actually here when I sent it. Oh, you did read it? Okay. So what I actually shared as well is what we will do is make sure that we've communicated with coaches and athletic directors so that they are clear that those 10 buses will not, especially at those 2 schools, it will not cover every single thing that they have at those schools. And I think that that's where some of the questions are coming from, because the schedule through athletics is set up for those other 10 buses. Right now, all 10 of them are through First Student, and we have further confirmed that we have the buses and the drivers for them.
So we're not necessarily saying it will take all 10 buses for one school. Or are we saying, or are we saying, we've got 12, 15 high schools, the schools that don't have parents that are able to do that, or how is that, or do we have to find more buses?
I think it's a combination.
To answer the question.
It's a great question, and it's a combination right now. And what I'm asking the team to provide for me is based on the current schedule, because they've already been scheduled for the athletic games that are moving forward for all the schools. I think those 2 schools likely could take all 10 of them. One of them could probably take all 10 of them, to be perfectly honest. But we do want to make sure that we're offering some support. We want to make sure that we're offering some support to those schools. And so we want to find out how many, if any, what routes the schools are using. So the example that I was given earlier, and I may have put it in the email, for example, if junior high soccer and high school soccer are playing a game at the same time, they prioritize such that the junior high soccer would ride the bus, the yellow buses, and high school soccer, they may drive themselves. Because they have the ability to do that, or they have parents that take them. So that was one of the ways that they prioritize at the school level. What I will do is I've asked the team to provide for the schools that may still need to provide some of their own transportation, specifically Walnut and Clark, how many of the buses that we're using right now are able to support those families in any way, so that we know that we're using some of that support also.
I would just follow up, and I know we have other questions, but I would just follow up that I worry about parents having to do it. I worry that from an insurance standpoint and the liability piece, and some parents can, some parents can't. That's unfair to kids. I would see that those schools that do have foundations or do have other sources, it might not be a bad idea for them to spend some of their monies, possibly being able to create a fleet, at least to augment, so that the other high schools are not suffering as a result of the great opportunities that exist in some of our schools. So, I mean, just as an equity standpoint, because I just think that's a way to look at it, especially for Walnut.
We're only talking right now about those two schools.
That's right.
So the other schools, as we've set up, but what I also want to find out is if we do have, because I've been told yes, but now I'm asking to see the schedule, that some of the activities and the sports, the athletic activities that are happening with them, we are providing transportation for that. We're just not in a position where we can provide transportation for all of their activities and all of their sports, but I don't have the clear answer on how many we're able to support and how many we're not. But in terms of the 10 buses, we do have the 10 buses. We've confirmed that we have the 10 buses. You know, if something happens, I know we've worked really hard on the budget. If there was opportunity to get more, I think that we would be able to do more, but we also have the van. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the buses.
Someone's going to say this is inequitable, and in a way it kind of doesn't sound consistent. So I do think while we're only talking about those two schools, I do think I want to understand a plan. Like, what is the plan? And I think you're working on that. But I think we just need to, we're only talking about two schools at the moment because those are two loud ones. But that I think the problem may be consistent across more schools. And so I'm just concerned that the equity of our transportation and athletics be maintained somewhat. So, but is this an area where, and I hate to, poor Lauren, I'm always asking her, like, Lauren, can you audit this? Can you audit that? And maybe that's just me, but we have Lauren here. So is this an area, when we talked about the outstanding obligations of it being $1.4 million in invoices and the timeliness of getting information from summer scholars really being a historical issue, but now, you know, we're talking about it now. Is this an area where our internal auditor can help us with regard to the system processes, areas that maybe we need to make some improvements in? Because to get invoices reconciled from June in September, some of that is normal, but is this an area that maybe we need to have an outside look at?
So for clarity, for what I shared was last year, we had a huge issue with this. And I understand that had been the issue historically with summer scholars. It hasn't been the issue this year, at least with our vendors. And so that was a part of the concern for last year. Right now, the concerns that we see are around the transportation invoices that we're digging into a little bit more. So it's not all of the vendors. So I think that we did put systems in place, as we did for transportation as well, but we put systems in place so that we're able to monitor this a bit better. And I do think it's just a part of changing the culture in the organization that when the work is done, the invoice is sent, that the invoice is not held, and then we have individuals that are following up to ask for those invoices. So I don't necessarily see that as a need right now. I'm looking at Jen. I don't think either one of us are seeing that as a need right now, but
most of the issues about education and the proper way to spend money and stay on top of that. And one of the things I've asked Mike to do is to organize a monthly meeting with the transportation vendors, because our vendors are notoriously have a reputation of moving along, and then suddenly old stuff will show up and that we didn't know about. And in fact, years ago, we made them sign an affidavit saying we've billed you for everything. And then, you know, 3 months later, we get old invoices pop up again. So I want to have more of a financial relationship with the vendors directly, with transportation in the room, of course. And so that we're reviewing it on a monthly basis so they don't fall behind or we don't get any more surprises.
Mr. Porter, did you have a comment?
I was just going to speak on summer scholars. I wanted to echo what the superintendent said. Big difference between this year and last year with summer scholars. The treasurer's office worked directly with the community engagement team to automate a lot of the processes with outside vendors as far as sending invoices and answering questions back and forth. So this year's Summer Scholars with the vendors, which was much smoother and much more efficient, excluding the transportation side. Transportation is something that we definitely need to still work on as far as the vendors, but outside of the transportation vendors, significant improvement this year with automation.
Thank you.
I think my question is still
Go ahead.
been open. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, if I may. So one thing we are doing, in addition to all the work that management is doing, it's always that balance of us auditing to help inform management in the board of new opportunity, new risks, things of that nature. And it seems like right now, from what I've just heard from management side, is they have a pretty good handle on what, those things that need to be addressed. But what we are doing through the status of the past internal audit recommendations that we'll be reporting out to the audit committee every other month. We've started that project and we're meeting with Chief Operating Officer Burkhart next Friday. And we'll start that cadence of meeting with them on a regular basis to say, hey, our original recommendations, what holds true, what maybe do we need to adjust and rethink, and then where have you already made some changes in implementation? So that way we can kind of keep a pulse from your perspective as well as to, are those audit risks and things of that nature still being monitored?
Okay. That was my question.
Last transportation piece for me is just where I know we flipped from the vendors doing the
Customer service.
Customer service, thank you.
Mhm.
And you sent it to us, didn't know, but I think the board would, whatever transportation reports you'll be putting together, I would assume some for the 28th, but I think people would like to see if that's working, and indeed the other piece as to whether or not people got, whether or not whatever the app or some of the other items for information worked as well as some of the routes that seem to be working better. So I think that was an issue.
Right.
I heard.
So we did do the transfer over for the staff. That's gone really, really well. Honestly, I think we still have 2 more positions to fill in that space. But we have been tracking the calls that have come in, how quickly those calls have been answered. There is just a difference with the team being CPS employees, to be completely honest, and they're responding as a part of the team. In terms of that. So the number is a 363 ride. And so anyone can call the number. I made some calls in myself as well. So just to kind of make sure that we are responding in the way that we should be responding. In terms of the app, there was one email that we received yesterday about the app, but then we received a positive email about that this morning. The staff responded, shared how to find that information on the site. We also, and for any of these that come up, we're trying to make sure that our website is a resource for families as well. And so from our virtual town hall on transportation, we did go through on that site how to locate the app with the pictures, with the links of showing them how to get to it once they go into Power School. And so I think that was helpful as well. So that's a resource that's there for anyone. Several have watched it outside of just the time that we did it, and that's why we've left it there as well.
And I know she's not watching, but to Erica Copeland Dansby, I want you to know that finally CPS people are taking the calls. I know you wanted that 8 years ago, but it takes time, and we appreciate the superintendent. Yes, sir.
Just a quick one, because I want to keep us going here also, but I think the issue with our buses also for extracurricular activities highlights 2 things that come to mind right away, which is one is that we have a limited way of we can transfer students by law. So state law, and we've in the past had to make sure folks understood that. And so some of those efforts to get others to, whether it's on the building level or whether it's outside communities who want to volunteer service and stuff, there's so many limitations and stuff. We want to make sure they're doing them the right way. Second thought that comes to mind also, though, is just that we have a lot of schools that are doing a lot of things. And so it is a good idea to maybe also kind of have that conversation with whether it's the athletic director, but also think about any general extracurricular activities that might require a yellow bus that day to take them someplace or those type of things. Making sure that everybody's on the same path and understanding what those things are and that they're communicated out to the parents. Because I do think, again, if you got 5 different sports teams happening one day You only got one bus that can, one or two buses that might be able to take those students. It should be that conversation happening up front with the coaches, with the players, with the parents from the school level to say, here's what we are doing, here's what our plan is. And I think that's what you're getting a better understanding from the athletic directors and whatnot.
And I think to add to that, we're also looking at, now that we have finite beginning and end times, there could be an opportunity to even increase the availability of busing resources outside of that 10 dedicated by looking at some of those buses that are finished their routes earlier because they're on an earlier start school. But what happens is by the time school ends and they run their full route, it's scheduled to only be 50 minutes, but it could be longer than that, depending on something else happening. So you still have the other issue on the other end. So we're trying to be thoughtful about it because we want to maximize as many opportunities as we have for families and also do that within, our budgetary guidelines.
So if a teacher has field trips planned, do they contact Hope Joy or do they contact the vendors? I'm thinking specifically about the Holocaust field trips. I know the last couple of years they've had to deal directly with the vendors, even though somebody else is paying. Which would you suggest?
So we did give guidance, I believe, to principals around
Okay.
how to maneuver through
Good.
that. But it would go for our district-wide kind of expectations for field trips, Holocaust being one of those. We would organize it through the transportation team so that it goes through that one person versus them just having to go to the vendors in order to give it more consistency and to make it user-friendly for staff as well.
Great.
That's what I believe the last guidance was, but we do have guidance.
And they're able to talk to teachers, or do they need to get their supervisors or their principals to line it up? I mean, who's arranging it should be the one doing it.
Right. So as I'm understanding from what was previously shared with me, it can be a person at the school that's setting it up. They would just do it through that person.
Perfect. Yeah.
Our person versus going directly to 3 different vendors trying to.
Absolutely. I think that's a godsend.
And it also becomes a check and balance for us because
Absolutely.
the other thing that we're finding where some of these late POs come in is because there's been a field trip that's been planned by somebody else instead of the school that they.
Makes much more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Last bit. All right. We're going to be talking about the budget, but prior to doing that, can we possibly go to 8? Because I think we've resolved a little bit of the last one. We agree that we need a fact finding, and we need it sometime prior to whatever the September financial town hall will take place. And if the superintendent and the treasurer can kind of figure out some dates and communicate to the board president about that. Is that the way that works?
Yes.
That would be great. What can you use COPS for?
Renovation of buildings, purchase of buildings.
Okay.
It would be incredibly helpful to have the big plan put together so that we can figure out how to finance instead of the the other way around.
Not a problem. I think this board was interested in big plans. We know you are, we know the superintendent is, and we know the community is, and we'd have to have that. And part of that's the maintenance piece and the cycle from our great facilities master plan. Part of it is dealing with what we need to deal with, especially in FY25. Okay, any questions on 8 before we go to our budget documents that you all have put together for us? Well, we'll let you. Because then we're going to spend more money when you leave. Actually, I would like her to step out rather than you, young lady. I don't know. Okay, what have we got for 8? And thanks for the documents. So how do we want to get started, members, on this? So we've got the schools, we've got the central office, ESSER funds.
So the first bullet on the fiscal year 24 is about the list of additions and cuts. So the file that you got last night was all 1,370-ish vendor contracts, whether we eliminated them or not. The whole population of them, and then the ones that are eliminated and the reasons why and their diversity codes. That's a humongous file, and I did not print it for today, but you have it in your email. And so that represents the cuts, the budget cuts, or the contracts that we cut. In terms of positions, you have 2 printed files in front of you. You have a summary of the school budgets by position. The budgeted positions that were compared on May 1st of 2023, so last fiscal year, and then effectively September 1st of 23, the difference, and then the cost of the 2024 cost of that. And so there is a net reduction in school budgets, and these are all funds, not just general, of $1.7 million, mostly related to the change in the reading specialist formulas and the reduction in super subs. And then the big, huge file that you have, I gave you the positions 2 different ways, because one way doesn't explain it completely. One of it is budget unit by budget unit, same time frame, May 1st to September 1st. And then I did it by position, because in central office, the positions are so different. And so then I try to put in notes, comments of explaining some of the changes. Like you'll see in both reports, the elimination of the school community coordinators, but then they had transferred into different roles that the board approved in a couple board meetings ago. And then I noted things that were strategically new positions that were being funded in the budget. So I'll pause there for questions.
You have questions?
Hurry before she gets back. Just kidding.
I did have a lot of questions about, and I tried to do it, I'm gonna pull this up too, by like line item number. I think it doesn't line up with the BUDU, like line items. I'm trying to pull this up. Because I went through and looked at, like, I have it as a line item 15, curriculum and instruction is gone from 48 to 24, down 23.6. And I just kind of looked at this first with the first lens of really big cuts, and big to me is over 5. So I'll just put that in context. But to cut curriculum instruction 23.6, and then like student family services cut 6.7, career tech cut 9.9, college enrollment was added 4.5. So I was trying to justify in my mind, okay, Chief of Staff added 3, non-public auxiliary down 5. It makes my antenna go up when it's something that I think directly impacts students.
Which is why I gave you the positions, because curriculum was not cut. If you see a couple lines below it, instructional equity was increased by 25.5. So it was a restructuring of the budget units.
Yeah, we keep saying that, and so maybe, and I appreciated that, and that's one of the reasons why I put that there, and I'm pulling this up, because you use the term shift. While I see that in some areas, overall in totality, it's a decrease. So we're decreasing curriculum and instruction 23.6, right?
No, we actually added bodies because you go from 23.6 minus to 25.5 plus. So it's a net positive increase on staff. That's why I gave you the position by positions, because you can see the curriculum level positions didn't go down.
That's what you're here for.
Yes.
Let's, I'm gonna hold my, because I'm pulling this up, because I actually went through and I'm like, wow, to me, we are cutting significant things, and I don't understand. I didn't understand some of the positions that we're adding. So I'm gonna pull this up and then let Student and Family Services down 6.7, line number 35. Career Tech down 9, and I'm assuming that that's those positions, right? Line 36.
So, like I said, that's why I gave you position by position, so you can see where the real, instead of just seeing a reorganization of bodies, where the real reductions are.
So let's look at Career Tech, line 36. And I guess it's 061 on the page.
Yes.
So Career Tech and Career and Technical Education went from 21.5 to 12.5, reduction of 9. Show me, can you help me walk through what you're saying, line item? When I go, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, oh my God, we're down 9. Help me reconcile that in my mind, that it's positions and there's been an increase of that reduction.
Okay, I can't answer that off the top of your head, but I will certainly be able to give you the details behind those 9.
Because I see Career Tech Coordinator, it says in 523, 14 positions, and then some difference, down 14 positions. Fiscal year 24 salary is 62, and then for a total 24 cost, 871, and then it says AP Culture. So are you saying that the AP Culture took over those positions?
Exactly. That was the
It's a combination.
I'm gonna say, when I look at AP Culture, I was just trying to, again, make sense on how that direct position that's touching students is morphed into something, shifted into something else. And curriculum instruction was just one item, and I'm like, okay, well, where does it go? And using your terminology of a shift, when I'm looking at curriculum instruction line item 15 on my page, 48.1 down to 24.5, or a net of negative 23.6. I want to understand. I want you to take me through that so that I can see that it's not 23.5, but there's 25 something someplace else.
So most of the Career Tech coordinators were centrally budgeted, even though they're allocated out to the schools. So most of the 9 is, that's what that is the reduction of the Career Tech coordinators that were replaced by the APs of Culture.
It wasn't the AP of Culture, though. It was the additional school counselor.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
I apologize.
So here on the sheet though, it's AP Culture.
That's my fault. It should say school counselor.
You know, and I'll let you keep going because I appreciate your questions, but just on that, something I keep meaning to say, when we have now added, this is good, like the word add anywhere, but when we do add, and we have added the social workers, and when we went through that whole folderol about could it be an administrator, but it was a social worker, when we've added the social workers and where we've added the counselors, let's just say in those high schools. When you do that, how close do you come in those high schools to almost meeting some of the national standards?
Very close.
I mean, there's a narrative to whatever we're doing that we need to also be doing. We're not, I'm not happy with where we are on the budget or whatever, and that's what's no surprise there. But I mean, part of it is our narrative. And if I think that all the follow about it should be a social worker, it should be a counselor. Actually, that is cool stuff. If you even get close, because I don't know how many, my alma mater, I don't know how many counselors they have. I mean, they could rent a van at this point in time, and I think that's great. And they all have different roles to play, but you're more than getting close to, what is it, 250 or something? That is a national standard. Or, those are the things we have to be able to say.
We've been working towards a national standard over the last 3 years, but I don't know, the addition of these 10 or 11 probably got us a lot closer to the national standard.
When you're presenting this to the board, you have board members. I'm going all the way back to Alex Coons, who made this his mission, was to add counselors. When I got on this board, there were only 4 high schools that even had counselors. I mean, this is a thing the community has wanted and has worked for, and you're delivering on it. And I just think that we have to have another way of looking at the narrative of this budget. And some of it's really bad narrative that we have to fix, but some of it's very cool, and it has to be close to the social work piece as well. So, I mean, I just, that's my third editorial comment for this committee. I have my 3 now. I get the narrative. Go for it.
Looking at like student services non-standard.
Yeah, keep
Explain
going.
that to me. Line item, because
So-
75 down 21.3. And again, I am just looking at this as things that I think directly impact students. In my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're cutting those things.
Well,
We're shifting.
so those are IEP driven. You want to start?
You can start first.
Those are the one-on-one pairs that are assigned, and they're driven by the students' IEPs, and so it's directly related to the number of students that have that need. We have trouble filling those positions every year, and so we also supplement with contracts through DSS to put contracted positions in there. What we discovered, and we're going through a more detailed audit of it, is they were budgeting for both the body and the contractor. So it was a challenge. And so we're going through those line items in more detail, but those are completely compliance driven. So if there's a reduction, it's because of the number of IEPs that are there.
I mean, I have more.
Well, I know, I have
I'm
to.
gonna take
No, no.
Again, I just see, we still haven't finished the curriculum instruction one, but I just see the things that directly impact students. To me, it looks very heavy in that manner, and it's concerning. So I'm on a 7, but I don't want us to get to a balanced budget by cutting things with the excuse if it's vacant. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. And so I see us hiring for various positions that don't impact students directly. And so, but we're cutting, and that's just a concern. And I haven't really, apparently this is not up to date because it should be counselor and not.
There's a mistake.
That was my typo.
I don't think it was not up. It is up to
It's
date.
updated. The numbers are right.
the-
It's just my typo.
Oh, let's go back through that. If it's not in culture, we've hired under career tech coordinator, we've hired the 871,000 under counselors. Or that's a shift.
We added 10 or 11 counselors that are focused on graduation, that are taking the work of those career tech coordinators. So they're now part of the CBA, and those are the ones that were funded through the Title I efforts.
Correct.
So that's on.
It's all, they're in, the counselors on the school page.
Okay.
So what's confusing to everybody is there are some positions that are budgeted centrally, but they actually serve in the schools. And then there's some positions that are funded through the CBA formulas that show up on the schools. And so it's holistically, there's been a big growth in counselors and school social workers together.
I'm gonna hold the rest of it.
Okay.
I'd be happy to schedule some time with you next week to answer any of your questions.
And I do think that the documents and stuff that we've received today need to be shared maybe in a more rapid effort than necessarily waiting for our minutes of the committee, because I think that gives all board members a bit of a head start on looking at it. But my issue, besides that, what I was saying about narrative and some of the positive piece here, and I've said this to the treasurer, I don't know that I've said it to the superintendent, and I probably have said it somewhere along the line to President Bell too, and President Sellers. We are not able to hire enough paras for the instructional strategies that this district has developed. And somebody better say that soon and figure it out, because the whole structure is based upon, whether it starts with class size, which we've talked about, that was another interesting discussion in the early part of the budget discussion, the budget process. But we have set ourselves up for failure from a standpoint of instructional strategies are based on teachers having paras, and paras providing particular services, whether it's the amount of money, whether it is the nature of the work, whether it is the new workforce that's out there, and that we're in a much more competitive employment environment. I worry about the paras. I worry too about the security assistants, where again, that's a competitive field now, big time. So I don't know what we have to do about that, but as we were starting the year, where are we on vacancies regarding paras?
We have a lot of vacancies. We started,
Okay.
including paras. I mean, at least 200 para vacancies,
Well,
and that includes classroom, but it includes all types of paras,
all types.
and it includes the one-on-one paras as well. And so that's even with the increase, we continue to work in that space. But I do agree with you that it's something that we need to have further discussion around. I think that, doing the increase that we've done at this point has offered some assistance. That's really, our civil service areas have been some of the areas that we've seen more of an increase. We really have in those areas as well. But there needs to be some conversation about the thought of that being the overall strategy, because in terms of thinking about the numbers of individuals that we have, and the overall role for that, the overall opportunity for that role, I think that it requires some deeper discussion.
And then obviously when we start to talk about collective bargaining agreements coming up with language and what have you, things have to be kind of reassessed from that standpoint too. And again, security assistance is a concern of mine, and the paras. The other piece, I go back again, it won't happen this year, but again, I go back to crossing guards. I go back to finding ways to make or puzzle together part-time jobs into full-time jobs, and us having complete control over that. And I think that the security, I think that the crossing guards is a direction. Some bus drivers, there's dedicated buses, dedicated bus drivers. There's ways to create personnel opportunities that make us much more competitive. But Vice President?
I'll just be quick because one, I want to thank Jen for putting putting the materials together, because I do think it's helpful to see at times the positions and what we've been doing. I think it's been something we've talked about for a little while, as to sometimes we have to do some reorganizing to put things into the right perspectives as to what they're doing and what roles are, especially when we have people who are centrally budgeted, they're at the schools, and as we make those changes into what their roles are. But I also, kind of piggybacking on your point here, though, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes in our community that we simply did not hire, as if these positions were things we chose not to hire for, when in fact it's just a struggle right now to hire for a lot of these positions. And I think like nursing is another example, but crossing guards is one that we've been doing this conversation since we came back to being in the building, at least.
That's right.
To say, what are our efforts to do it? And it's like, the reality is that the folks who did some of these things in the past have made choices now not to do it going forward. So how do you bring a next group of people forward? And so I think that is something that's a absolute conversation we should have as part of a philosophy of the district. But I think it's important to recognize there is a difference between what we budget as far as an FTE position versus what we can fill. And that sometimes will have implications in the school building of what services can be provided and what can't.
I would agree. President Bell?
Thank you. Just listening a little bit, I think this goes back to some of the things that we have been trying to say. This is a place of education, as we know, and we always have spoken about inclusion. When it comes to the positions in which we represent, a lot of these positions are not, these classifications are not included in conversations. We also spoke many years about curriculums being developed that would help to move people, even students from certain places, well, once they graduate into these jobs, but they haven't been looked into. Being a paraprofessional, you know, everybody just think you're in the room and all you do is sit there and do this or do that, and they do more than that. Being a security, so these things need to be established inside this curriculums here, so that it's easier for people to transfer into these jobs. And also, when you're talking about certain classifications, we need to be at the table, and we're not there.
Okay.
So, and a lot of times, certain classification or positions are more valued, so they believe, than others. And so we've consistently been asking to be at the tables where the conversations are going on about our members. That would help move things in the right direction and also help getting people hired, you know, whether it be the money, whether it be the way they feel about the job that they're working, because they're feeling as if they're not valued. So there needs to be some changes within the house to make this occur.
Well taken. I'm sure the superintendent would respond and agree.
Yeah, so I appreciate it. Thank you, President Bell, because we've had quite a few conversations. Paraprofessionals are not new to our district. We've had our paraprofessionals for a long time in the district, so that's not a new position that's been added to us. I do think that there is definitely value, and we've had some conversation about, and the district started doing some work around that, but there's a lot more work to do around pipeline programs. So as President Bell is speaking of the curriculum is really about how we are able to get individuals in pipeline programs so that as they're moving from one phase to the next, that they're able to then go into a position that they're eligible for. And I also see an opportunity with what's being shared, and I don't know where we've been in this space, but hearing her speak made me think about our recent graduates. As we think about some of the positions that we have available in the district, how are we looking at recent graduates, or how are we reaching out to recent graduates that may or may not be working right now? And so, you know, looking at that as some opportunities. So those are some things, that's a short-term win, a short-term idea that we can do now is reaching out to graduates to share with them the opportunities that we have for employment for them right now in the district. Some may be in college, but there's also a part-time opportunity for them as well. So I do think it's a much greater conversation because there is value across the board, but we know that we also have to continue to work to get done what needs to get done for our students in classrooms, even if, to your point, that it's not as if we're not filling the positions, it's as if we have in the bodies the personnel to fill the position. So I think that that's the difference, and that shouldn't be the misconception.
And I would add that the marketplace has actually increased your power in negotiating with us to have reality, because the marketplace, it's a remarkable thing, but if we are unable to fill positions, certainly there's positions maybe that don't need to be filled. Maybe there's positions through consolidation as a result of some of the ad hoc efforts. There's all that, but there's also recognizing us being more competitive in getting this opportunity to fill these positions. Other comments?
I'll leave with one more piece before I have to step out. I do want to just come back to the piece, and I know that Treasurer Wagner and Dr. Moffitt may have some conversation, but I would like to be a part of that if as well, because I think where I don't want to leave with the misconception that we have cut $23 million in curriculum, and that's directly connected to students. So I want to try to clarify it one more time, since I wasn't a part of that exchange with the clarification.
Sure, go ahead.
In curriculum and instruction, a year previous was under one umbrella. So everything that was under curriculum and instruction, whether it was academic, whether it was support services, it was all under one body of work. In the transition, instead of having one person responsible for that, that went into overall curriculum and instruction in terms of academic pieces, English, math, science, social studies, and those areas that were instructional equity went into another pot. So when we think about that 23 million as a negative, the positive to that becomes the 25, which really gives an increase of about $2 million in terms of additional support in that area. So it's not a decrease, it's a movement of, they were here the year before, they've moved to a different organizational structure for the next year, and additional support services have been added to that space. So that's where we see our English language learners, that's where we see our gifted and talented programs, that's where we see art and music. So in that space, there's been increase for support, not a decrease. So I didn't want to just leave the conversation that we had cut $23 million because we had not. And in terms of the last clarity for the career tech folks, that 9, when we had the full discussion about what those new roles would do, a part of that work for the school counselor, because that role had to look different than what the school counselors are currently doing. A part of that work was the career tech work as well, as they are working on, which also becomes a part of graduation, as they are working on graduation and graduation cohorting. So it's actually, even in that space, while it looks like a reduction, it's a reduction to the central office, but it's an add to the school level, and it's an add of even more than the 9 because of the number of schools. I actually think it was 11 that we actually added the positions to. So I just wanted to clarify that part, if that would help at all, as we're trying to understand that part of it. But I'll gladly be a part of that if time permits.
Moving forward, we know that you all are going to be presenting
on the 28th.
You're not expecting us upon presentation to vote.
No.
So I would hope that whoever's arranging the meetings will provide a whole board enough opportunity to ask questions and continue the discussions that we've had. But part of this effort to, and I would hope that at that time somebody might, like the vice president's been trying to say and does say all the time, about how difficult next year will be. I think that in fairness to the board, and by that next budget there will be a different board, at least by one, maybe more, but it would seem to me that having a reality therapy about FY25 should impact what we say or do for FY24. And I don't think that the full effort has been made to make, because I think we would arrive at some different decisions or endorsements or whatever if people knew. We've been sharing the cliff and all that stuff. I'm not just talking about ESSER and whatever. I'm talking about these other decisions, as well as thematically insourcing, outsourcing, as well as, talking in terms of some of the whatever. I just hope that it's more than sharing these numbers, because sharing only these numbers, which are great for us to absorb, we need some much more environmental, atmospheric context before we start to even not start to have the discussion, but to continue the discussion.
So I think this is a great start. I'm happy to entertain conversations because I want to understand, but I also think that I completely agree with Board Member Bolton in that just providing these numbers and then it doesn't completely give me as a board member complete context and understanding. So I'm wanting the community to have the same level of clarity. And I'm looking and I'm hearing, I understand, I think I'm pretty good at understanding the numbers, but then I don't see them add up. Under ESL, it's down 2, and then under student services, gifted and talented, it's only up 1, but we're down 21. So I want to understand, because what's happening in the community is that the perception is that we're cutting, but then they see things being added. And I really do want to understand it, because then I can explain it to the community.
And I'm happy to spend more time with that, but we actually added 12 ELL coordinators in the schools.
Okay.
So you have to look at them together.
Okay, so you'll be able to help me see on the school side. So I'm looking at the school side.
Yep.
And I just see English as a second language. Which page is it?
So ELL coordinators right above English as a second language. There's an additional 12 bodies.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's the 21 minus 12. We just have to get to the rest of them.
And
And
again,
you'll be able to do that. That's separate.
and again, this leads back to what we talked about 2 meetings ago. And the 2 meetings ago, as we look at the next budget, difficult as 25 will be, finding ways to get it down to the school level so that the community can see it, so that we can actually understand the equity issue of it. I mean, this beats the heck out of, forgive me, Jen, school-wide pooling, which there was at least 7 years that you couldn't figure out anything. I mean, you could, but a lot of us couldn't. But now this is very helpful, but I think that is what the community probably wants to expect and see, and begins to be very helpful.
So I feel compelled to remind the public and the board and everybody in the room that the school budgets are based on projected enrollment. So as enrollment fluctuates building by building, it drives changes in staffing. And so as we are still rebounding from our COVID drop of enrollment, we'll continue to move forward. But at the same time, our per pupil revenues are shrinking. So it makes it harder and harder to adopt to new.
Shrinking because?
Of yeah, state revenue formula. The formula changes made us wealthier, and they're taking more money in putting it towards vouchers. And property values or property taxes don't increase with enrollment.
So again, that's the context piece, and I feel compelled, just so we all know that I feel compelled anytime that you mention those formula. I feel very compelled to always say that the last thing that you can do for equity is formulas. But I understand why we do it. It's helpful and it's fair, or I've got it. But I'm just saying any formulatic kind of effort kind of begins to negate.
Correct. But 99% of the formulas are driven by collective bargaining agreements. So those would have to change first.
And that's the whole thing about building our entire instructional approach around paras that we can't, find to hire. These are big, big things that have to happen in this district. These are not small things.
These are financial terms that need to happen.
Well, I'm into that, but I don't know about how we can fix that right now.
6-hour town hall.
We good? Yep. Other questions, comments? Thanks for staying long. Especially to you, Madam President, since you were here for policy too. I think there's only a few of us that have been here since at 9 o'clock. Thank you all. Do I move to adjourn? All right. Okay, I'll take the second move as a second.